Imagine this. Having a power so great, it could change the very course of life across the entire Pride Lands. A force unlike anything the kings of the savannah had ever witnessed before. A power that could make mountains tremble, rivers shift their flow, and even the skies respond. This isn't some old legend. It's the truth that Kion, Simba's son, lived when he inherited the roar of the elders. But here's the twist. What if I told you Kion didn't use the roar only to protect the kingdom, as he was meant to? What if he did strange, even shocking things? Things very few know about. Actions no one ever imagined, yet they happened, leaving behind a mark that changed the future of the land forever. Today, we're uncovering the 12 strangest things Kion ever did with the roar. Some of these moments will make you see him in a completely different light, while others will leave you wondering, was this power truly a blessing or a curse? But don't rush. The most shocking truth won't be revealed at the beginning. You'll only see it once we reach the very end. Kion was never just a young cub trying to prove himself as the protector of the Pride Lands. From the moment he inherited the roar, he stood at a crossroads. Either honor the legacy of the ancestors, or twist the roar into a dangerous weapon. What happened next was a mix of both. Moments of bravery and heroism, and other times filled with mystery and choices no one could explain. Take the first strange moment, when Kion used the roar against his own friends. One time he got into a heated argument with Bunga, his closest companion. It started small, just a childish fight about who should lead the group. But in a flash of anger, Kion lost control and unleashed the roar in the one direction it should never have gone, towards his friend. He quickly pulled back and tried to explain himself, but the damage was done. For a brief moment, Bunga felt genuine fear of the cub he had always called family. And that raises the question, does the roar sometimes control its wielder instead of the other way around? That incident led to something even stranger. Kion didn't only use the roar on his enemies, or when he was angry. One day, he turned it on himself. Imagine that. A cub standing alone, unleashing the roar into the sky, and then walking right into the storm he had created, as if testing his own limits. It was like he was asking, do I truly deserve this power? Or did the ancestors give me something I'll never be able to handle? That moment left a deep mark inside him, planting seeds of doubt about the bond between the roar and his own soul. And the oddities didn't stop there. Once, Kion used the roar to stop the rain. Picture it. The skies dark and heavy, thunder echoing across the land, rain pouring down as animals scattered for cover. Then Kion stood tall, lifted his head to the heavens, and let out a roar so powerful it split the clouds apart. In seconds, the storm was gone, as if nature itself had bowed to him. That wasn't just power, it was defiance of the natural order. So was the roar tied only to the land? Or did its reach extend to the sky itself? But Kion didn't stop at changing the weather. In another moment, he used the roar to move a massive boulder. Something so heavy it seemed impossible. It was as if the earth itself responded to him. Witnesses couldn't help but wonder, was the roar simply a powerful voice meant to scatter enemies? Or was it a spiritual force capable of bending even stone? And perhaps the most chilling of all, Kion once used the roar to communicate with spirits that no longer existed in this world. Yes, imagine that. The ancestors themselves seemed to open a doorway, allowing him to reach beyond death. Even Nala couldn't explain what happened. Was it just an echo of the roar playing tricks on the mind? Or did the roar, as the true inheritance of the ancestors, actually break the barrier between life and death? No one knew for sure, but it sparked fears that never truly went away. This is where we see another side of Kion, the fear of himself. Because with every new discovery, with every strange use of the roar, one question grew louder in his mind. What if I'm the real danger to the Pride Lands? That thought haunted him, even in his dreams. And if the roar could affect friends, the skies, the land, and even the spirits, could it do something even greater? There was one rare moment when Kion let out a roar that sent the hyenas fleeing without a single fight. But it wasn't just fear. Something else happened. For a few seconds, their bodies froze. They couldn't move. It was as if the roar had bound them in place. Not just intimidation, but a curse. Could the roar truly control the bodies of others? Each of these moments opens a new door of mystery. Did Kion truly understand what he was doing? Or was the roar revealing new faces of its power each time? And the bigger question, if he could do all of this, what would happen if he ever lost control? Even Simba, the great king himself, could not explain his son's actions. He warned him time and again never to misuse the roar. Yet deep down, Simba knew Kion was walking a path no one before him had walked. Even Mufasa, speaking from the heavens, didn't give him strict answers. Instead, he let Kion figure it out for himself, as if the ancestors already knew this power would unlock secrets hidden since the beginning of time. Every time Kion uses the roar, things are never as simple as they first appear. Beneath the surface, there are tiny details, hidden signs, moments that many overlook, but they carry powerful meaning. These clues reveal that the roar wasn't just a simple gift from the ancestors. It was something far greater, and maybe far more dangerous than anyone imagined. The first striking clue comes during one of Kion's battles with the crocodiles. At first, everything seemed normal. Kion roared to protect his friends, driving the danger away. But look closer, and you'll see something strange. The crocodiles didn't just run because of the sound or fear. For a brief moment, they completely lost their balance, as if some hidden force stripped them of control over their own bodies. They froze, helpless. This wasn't a natural reaction. It felt like the roar reached directly into their nerves. So we have to ask, could the roar go beyond sound and actually affect the mind and body of living creatures? The second clue comes from his encounters with the hyenas. Hyenas were always the symbol of chaos and trouble. But when Kion's team faced them, something unexpected happened. With just one roar, they didn't only flee, they turned on each other. Some even bit one another in blind panic, as if madness had infected them. It was as though the roar didn't just scare them, it planted hysteria inside them, driving them towards self-destruction. If that's true, then Kion's power wasn't just about fear. It could twist the very spirit of his enemies. The third clue is even more mysterious. One night under the glowing moon, Kion trained alone. When he unleashed the roar, nothing on the ground moved, but the moon itself seemed to tremble, and the stars around it shimmered as if the entire sky had answered. Some say it was just a cinematic illusion, a trick of the moment. But if taken seriously, could the roar actually be connected to cosmic forces beyond the Pride Lands? Could it be a key to something far older than the kings of the savannah? Another strange moment involves Nala. She once followed Kion, worried about how often he was relying on the roar. As she came closer during one of his powerful cries, she witnessed something unbelievable. For a few seconds, she saw images appear in the air, memories of the past. She saw Mufasa standing tall and a young Simba running after him. Then, just as quickly, the visions vanished. Nala wasn't hallucinating. It was as if the roar had opened a window into forgotten times, which raises a haunting question. Can the roar unlock memory or even time itself? And then there's the fifth clue. During a desperate battle against a huge pack of hyenas, Kion roared with all his strength. But it wasn't just his voice that echoed. Another sound emerged. A chorus of roars like hundreds of lions from the past joining in. Everyone froze in awe. Was it only an echo? Or had the spirits of the ancestors truly joined him? If it was the latter, then the roar wasn't just Kion's power. It was a gateway, summoning the voices of every king that came before. Even more unsettling, other animals began reacting to the roar without him aiming it at them. In one scene, he roared toward the horizon, nowhere near a flock of birds passing overhead. Yet suddenly, they shifted direction, flying in a completely new path, as if their inner compass had been rewritten. This wasn't just sound. It was like invisible waves altering the instincts of living creatures. And that makes us wonder, if the roar can change the course of birds, could it change the course of entire nations? But perhaps the most terrifying clue of all is what happened to Kion himself. After unleashing one of his strongest roars, his eyes changed for a brief moment. They weren't the eyes of a young cub anymore. They looked like the eyes of a full-grown lion, filled with raw power. Few noticed this detail, but it revealed something chilling. The roar could even change its wielder, showing glimpses of who they might become, or who they once were. Could it actually alter the identity of the one who carries it? Could it merge Kion with the spirits of the past? All these clues lead us to one inevitable question. Was Kion truly controlling the roar, or was the roar controlling him? With every new mystery, the line between gift and curse became thinner. And imagine this. What if Kion wasn't chosen because he was the strongest, but because he was the weakest link? What if the ancestors picked him precisely because he was the most emotional, the most vulnerable, the easiest to influence? In that case, the roar wasn't a gift at all. It was a test. A dangerous experiment to see how a young heart could bear the weight of 1,000 souls. Even Simba himself seemed uncertain. He often looked at his son with concern, wondering, would Kion grow into a king greater than him, or a disaster waiting to happen? And Sarabi, with all her wisdom, could not give an answer either. With each clue, the mystery only deepens. Because this isn't just about strength or heroism, it's about secrets the ancestors may have deliberately kept hidden. And maybe, just maybe, Scar knew more about this power than he ever admitted. Imagine this. From the very first moment Kion received the roar, he couldn't control it. What if that power wasn't meant to be a shield, as the ancestors intended, but instead, a doorway? A doorway to a future filled with chaos, mystery, and fear. In this alternate reality, things didn't start with small victories. No, from the very beginning, the roar pulled Kion into places he couldn't understand. Each time he used it, he discovered something new, not just about himself, but about the earth, the skies, even the balance of life itself. At first, the roar brought more destruction than safety. When he tried to chase the hyenas away from the Pride Lands, it didn't just scare them off, they vanished, wiped out as if the land had swallowed them whole. No one knew where they went. No one dared to ask. And that silence, the mystery, terrified the animals. Not because of the hyenas, but because of the cub who carried a power no one could explain. Soon, the very world began to bend around him. Trees no longer bowed to the wind. They bent to his roar. Rivers shifted their courses with the sound of his voice. Even the sky seemed tied to his emotions. When he grew angry, storm clouds gathered. When he was sad, the colors of the world dimmed, like the land itself was mourning with him. The roar became less of a gift, and more of a curse. It wasn't something Kion called upon when needed. It lived inside every breath, every heartbeat, reshaping everything in its path. And with time, the Pride Lands divided. Some believed Kion was destined to be the greatest king the savannah had ever known. Others feared he was the beginning of its end. Even Simba was caught in a painful dilemma. Should he protect the kingdom from his son, or protect his son from himself? There was no easy choice. Kion wasn't evil, but he had become the vessel of something beyond control. As the roar spread its influence, darker signs appeared. The ground split with cracks that no one had ever seen before, as if the earth itself answered his call. Some animals disappeared without a trace, as though the roar had pulled them into another world. And on moonlit nights, his cry echoed far beyond the Pride Lands, reaching deserts untouched by lions and mountains no one had ever climbed. It was like awakening an ancient voice, lost for thousands of years. In this alternate world, Kion was no longer just the heir of a sacred gift. He was the center of a power far greater than himself. And every time he roared, he lost a piece of his innocence. Slowly, his voice stopped sounding like a child's. Instead, it became a haunting mix of every lion who ever lived, layered with the confusion of a cub who no longer knew who he was. The Pride Lands would never be the same. Trust between animals began to crumble. To some, the roar was salvation. To others, it was a curse that would consume them all. The land of harmony turned into a silent battleground, not against hyenas or crocodiles, but within the lions themselves, as they argued over the fate of Kion's power. And if this division continued, things would only grow darker, because the roar was no longer just a weapon. It became a language, a force rewriting the laws of nature itself. Giraffes, birds, even the smallest of creatures no longer lived by instinct. They lived under one voice, Kion's voice. But the scariest part? The roar stopped waiting for his command. It burst out on its own, driven by his emotions. Anger, grief, even a flicker of fear. Each feeling triggered waves of power. A breeze could become a storm. A heartbeat could silence another creature. Kion no longer trusted his own breath, which leads to a chilling idea. What if the ancestors never meant the roar to be a gift, but a test? A test to see if a single cub could bear the weight of absolute power. Maybe they were even waiting for him to fail, to decide whether the Pride Lands should remain as they were, or be remade entirely. In this alternate reality, the Pride Lands stood on the edge of collapse. Because Kion was no longer just part of the kingdom, he was the kingdom itself. Every change in him reshaped the land, and every change in the land reshaped him. The cub and the savannah were no longer separate. They were bound together, sharing the same destiny. What if everything we saw from Kion and the Roar was only the beginning? All the strange signs, all the changes in the Pride Lands, just a prologue to something far bigger and far more dangerous. With each use of the Roar, something began to shift. Not just around Kion, but inside him. At first, it looked simple. Fatigue, distraction, moments of silence where he seemed lost in thought. But soon, it became darker. Kion began hearing voices in his head, not the voices of his friends or his family. These were older, stronger, commanding. Some voices urged him forward, filling him with courage. Others whispered of power, urging him to strike without mercy. The Roar was no longer just a call to the ancestors. It had become a doorway. And through that doorway, the ancestors weren't just answering, they were entering him. Here's the twist. The Roar was never meant to belong to Kion alone. It was a vessel, a container for every king who had ever lived. Each Roar summoned fragments of their power. But with time, the spirits stopped leaving. They stayed. And little by little, Kion became more than just himself. He became a crowd, a battleground of voices, all fighting for control. Sometimes he spoke with the wisdom of Mufasa. Other times, his rage burned with Scar's fury. And then, in rare, terrifying moments, he seemed like something entirely new. Something no lion had ever been before. The Pride Lands began to notice. The animals no longer feared the sound of his roar alone. They feared the lion who was no longer one lion. Kion appeared in strange places, speaking in riddles, as if carrying messages from a world beyond. Some of those messages were horrifying warnings. The kingdom will fall. The throne will shift. Blood will rise again. No one knew if they were prophecies or madness. And then came the breaking point. The Roar itself separated from him. One night, in the middle of a violent outburst, Kion unleashed a roar so powerful it shattered the sky. But even after his mouth closed, the sound continued. It thundered across the heavens on its own, a storm of voices that no longer needed him to exist. That was the moment balance began to collapse. Because if the Roar could survive without Kion, it meant it didn't need a host at all. It wasn't just a gift. It wasn't just a curse. It was alive. The ancestors' power had always been a primal force. Older than lions, older than the Pride Lands. It wasn't meant to be locked inside one body forever. It wanted freedom. Picture the final scene. Kion standing at the edge of Pride Rock, the wind tearing at his mane, terror in his eyes. The Roar bursts out of him, forming a shadow of light and sound so massive it covers the horizon. Every animal looks up, not at a lion, but at a being of pure energy. Something not of the earth, not of the skies, but from somewhere far older. And in that moment, Kion realizes the truth. He was never chosen to keep the Roar. He was only a bridge, a temporary vessel until the Roar could return to what it truly was. Limitless, boundless, and free. And now the question becomes, should Kion fight to hold the Roar inside him, even if it destroys him? Or let it go, and risk the Pride Lands facing a power no one can ever control?